Hello and welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. This week we'll be looking at 2004 and the development of the Amorphous Androgynous sound. Sorry, still no FSOL. Amorphous Androgynous, the Isness and the Otherness. Release date 10th January 2004. After a long wait, a new Future Sound of London album was announced in 2003. Ish. Whatever the proper new Future Sound of London record would have been, it was generally considered by fans to have become FSOL remixes Amorphous Androgynous, which itself ended up just being an expanded 2-CD edition of the Isness, the second disc titled The Otherness. This received a mixed response from fans, some of whom were hoping for an album of new music. Having been well over a year since the previous album, others appreciated the opportunity to pick up some tracks from the Abbey Road version of the Isness more easily. Gaz first spoke about the material in late 2002 in an interview with Pop Matters. We've started remixing tracks from the album and funnily enough I think we've got the balance now. Sometimes when you talk broadly about something it's quite easy to disagree, but I think on this album we spent a lot of time fighting with words instead of doing the work and finding an equilibrium with it. Now that we've remixed the tracks, we're getting a really good sound. This gives the impression that some of the remix material is more up Brian's street, and the electronic sound of the mellow hippo version certainly seems to back that up. In 2004, he described the Otherness to Scruff magazine as a different perspective on the same thing, which is called from remixes and versions that I thought were as good, which didn't make that last version. The Otherness features a range of material from different sources, including the first CD release of Chihuahua, previously a vinyl-only Isness track, and versions of Mellow Hippo Disco Show in Elysian Fields, as well as Goodbye Sky from the Abbey Road mispress cut. She Sells Electric Ego and Slow Mo are included, having previously been released on the Mellow Hippo Disco Show single, albeit without the latter's closing environment. 4 tracks are labelled as Divinity reinterpretations, believed at the time to be from the then forthcoming Divinity single, and there's also a new version of The Lovers. The remaining 3 tracks, Rural Green, Chinese Whispers and Theram, are all new and exclusive to the release. While these raised some expectations, the short length of 2 disappointed some fans, especially with the knowledge that many more full-length songs were recorded during these sessions for the Isness. The Mellow Hippo Disco Show, labelled here bizarrely as Yo-Yo, crossfades into Goodbye Sky. The 2 work well together, but the rest of the disc features gaps between tracks, slightly disappointing after the largely gapless Mellow Hippo single. Initially released in a burger pack sleeve with 1 CD on each tray, a second version was released in 2005, unknown to the band, in a standard double jewel case. Due to size limitations, the booklet had to be cut back, reduced to 8 pages with the liner notes, lyrics and credits and thanks all crammed in. The front cover simply features the original overlaid with a rustic looking framing, featuring simply Amorphous Androgynous. The label still insisted on adding a sticker with the Future Sound of London Present phrasing though. A new font is used, one which would be present for the next few Amorphous releases. On regaining rights to the material in 2012, the band reissued the set as a new 2-CD package on FSOL Digital with an expanded 12-page booklet credited to the Amorphous Androgynous. This version also improves the blending between Katie and the frame. As with the rest of the Future Sound of London recordings catalogue, the release scheduling didn't go quite to plan, with an original release date of 11th November 2003, then pushed back to December 1st. On 16th December, one of the band's management posted on the official forum, "I'm trying to get to the bottom of what is actually going on with the release of this. As soon as I hear back from the record company, I'll let you all know." It was eventually released on 10th of January. 3 months later, a standalone version of The Otherness was released in the US. Bizarrely, the Burger Pack carries the catalogue number FSOL CD 105. In October 2003, Bargain Music Store CD Zone were offering an Isness reissue pre-order with the catalogue number FSOL CD 104. This never came along and that number remains a gap in the catalogue. Goodbye Sky. I totally forgot to cover this in the Isness video, so let's do it here. The Abbey Road version of the Isness closes on this marvellous slice of daft psychedelic pop. My first impression on hearing the brass band loops was, what is going on? And it remains a startling and odd opening to the piece. Gaz has spoken on Facebook about how he wanted to create an album of psychedelic pop songs, and the Isness ended up a long way from that. Bizarre then that Goodbye Sky was one of the tracks removed for the final cut. There's more than a touch of the Beatles about the layers of brass instruments, somewhere between Good Morning and Magical Mystery Tour, followed by his vocoded vocals, lyrically somewhat nonsensical. She's dreaming at the edge of this world, nobody knows that she's my girl, don't cry. The string and harpsichord arrangement in the vocal section calls to mind Opus 40 by Mercury Rev from their Deserters Songs album, cited as one of the records that inspired the sound of the Isness. Eventually the brass returns, fading away into a fairground waltz and finally silence. It's an opinion splitter of a song, one likely to appeal to fans of whimsical 60s psych pop, and far less to those after the spiritual or funky sides of Amorphous, or anything even resembling FSOL. These same brass parts form the basis of another song, Marylebone Road, which was recorded first and remained unreleased until 2008. On the Otherness in 2004, it crossfades with the Mellow Hippo Disco Show in a 1-2 of daft pop music. The Lovers, Love is the Lover. While most of the Otherness consists of Abbey Road versions, B-sides, potential B-sides and outtakes, one track stands out as a little unusual, this new version of The Lovers. Fans reported a new version of the track played at the Stereo Leto Festival, which was most likely this mix. While starting much like the original, things begin to change quite quickly. The piano line enters much sooner, and a minute into the track we're already well into the guitar solo. Belushi's sitar makes a new appearance, and then in the breakdown at 2 minutes, jazzy, sultry piano chords and string samples are added. The second half throws everything at the track, resolving with gorgeous strings and layers of vocals, adding an oddly beautiful and emotional vibe to a previously more upbeat track. Always had a bit of an issue with the original feeling a touch too sparse in the first half and never quite feeling as legitimately funky as it should, and this version feels like such a vast improvement. By moving into a more ethereal funk sound and emphasising the various solos and layers, there's less emphasis on this slightly static breakbeat and double bass line. It's moody, sultry, melodic funk piece which plays to the band's strengths. By far my favourite version of The Lovers. Maharishi Raga. One of many pieces recorded for the eventually scrapped 40-minute Divinity single, Maharishi Raga takes the key melodic elements from the original as a basis for a much slower piece. Despite the tablas and sitar being high up in the mix, it doesn't really feel like an actual raga. Various modulation effects and squelchy sounds give it a strangely aquatic sound, and the slower tempo and emphasis on chord changes definitely puts a focus on the emotive elements of the track. It's a pretty little piece, but quite strange. The band Divinity. By late 2003, Gaz was starting to put together a live version of Amorphous Androgynous for gigs, which would commence fully in 2004. As a preview of this, a live-in-studio version of Divinity was recorded for its single release. Recorded at Fortress Studios with overdubs, electronics and processing later added at Galaxial Pharmaceutical, the track is clearly the same song, but with a very different arrangement. Gaz's vocals are a lot less nasal, and with no gospel choir, have to take the lead throughout. The long intro is missing, with emphasis on the main song section itself. Despite the better vocal take, the live band arrangement made the track even more controversial with fans than the original. This is as far away from FSOL as Amorphous had gone at this point. The live band would go on to form the core of the Alice in Ultraland sessions worked on at the same time. An edit of the track, Divinity The Band Mix, was included on the Divinity promo single. Rural Green. The first of the 3 completely new tracks on the Otherness, Rural Green is a remarkably un-Amorphous-y track that could easily fit on, say, ISDN. Dan Pemberton's drums are the focus, pounding away at the centre of the track, around which reversed melodies, guitar notes, synth lines and FSOL-like unidentified samples meander. It's a subdued, moody piece, a melancholic vibe running throughout. The main track ends with Calls of Rooks, a sample used regularly throughout the entire Amorphous psychedelic catalogue, before, remarkably, a closing environment comes in, with electric piano, whistling and a harmonica. This outro would be reused in 2008 on Little Little Man, and was used in 1999 on an early version of Theram. Rural Green is one of my favourite pieces from the Isness sessions, and stylistically it looks ahead to later releases like The Woodlands of Old and Environments 4. Really intriguing track. Chinese Whispers. The biggest disappointment on the Otherness has to be Chinese Whispers. When promised with 3 new unreleased tracks from the Isness sessions, I'm not sure anybody was hoping one of them would be a 1-minute sound collage built from elements of other tracks on the album. It's intriguing, especially when playing Spot the Sample. The Lovers, Divinity, A Tongue is Like a Jellyfish and High Tide on the Sea of Flesh are the most obvious ones, but there are undoubtedly many more. But as a track in its own right, it's a bit pointless. The Conga Run. Where Maharishi Raga slowed Divinity to an uplifting dirge, is such a thing possible? The Conga Run does the opposite, turning it into a slice of uplifting instrumental rock, led by piano chords and extensive guitar soloing from Stu Rowe. It's glorious and no doubt considered incredibly cheesy by many. Electronic production is still present in the layers, samples and breakbeats and synth lines. It's effectively the Pat Metheny group fed through a computer. Theram. The third and final exclusive track on the Otherness is a touch disappointing in its length, running to 1 minute 55, especially considering it's one of the oldest pieces from the entire era. Begun in 1997 as heard on the June Fun radio transmission, the track underwent a lot of changes, being sped up with a new breakbeat and tambura drone added, but the final version listed here still sounds very much like an FSOL work. Again, it's very clear that this was recorded largely, if not entirely, at Earthbeat. Despite many psychedelic elements being present, the tambura, guitar chords, the violin, their very nature is very much chopped and looped. This is especially noticeable by no additional musicians being credited at all. The track was completed in 98 or 99 and appeared on the leaked 1999 Sessions collection a few years later under the name The Ram. The final version includes the outro of Guru's song in place of that version's Rural Green outro. With the very FSOL-like sound, it's quite likely that had this not been released on the Otherness, it might even have ended up on an FSOL from the archives release several years later. Toy Piano. The Otherness closes on a bittersweet note, a minute-long piano version of Divinity played by Max Richter. Whether real or sampled, the piano clearly needed tuning, but this gives it an enjoyably off-kilter strangeness. Although initially suspected to have been recorded for the Divinity EP, the piece once again originates in the late 90s. Perhaps it was originally recorded for the Divinity single planned at the time. It will go on to be used in a Heinz TV advert a couple of years later. Amorphous Androgynous, The Otherness. With the gradual raising of awareness of the Amorphous project, even the US got an Amorphous Androgynous release in 2004. The band was so heavily unsatisfied with the way Hypnotic treated the Isness, badly promoted, no reference to Amorphous Androgynous, the complete mispress debacle, that Fulfill licensed the Otherness as a standalone release to Psycho Baby. Not the most obvious home for either FSOL or Amorphous, admittedly, with a catalogue largely consisting of original era goth and synth pop musicians like Love and Rockets, Gary Newman, and Bauhaus's Daniel Ash. Still, with the Isness exclusively distributed by Hypnotic, the release did at least give US fans a chance to buy the second disc of the UK's Isness and Otherness double pack. Their cover stating simply Amorphous Androgynous, the band were no doubt more satisfied, although a spine and sticker stating FSOL Present were still present. A sparse 4-page booklet rounds out a fairly simple package, but nevertheless one of some use to American fans. Interestingly, the album was often imported to the UK, and I picked up a relatively cheap copy in HMV over here. At least one pressing of the CD contains the final mix of the Isness instead of the Otherness, because, a release of this era's material couldn't go by without at least one major fuck-up. Amorphous Androgynous, Divinity. Release date, April 2004. In April 2003, the second single from the Isness was announced to be Divinity, with the band working on creating another multi-part 40-minute suite a la the Mellow Hippo Disco Show. This being 9 months after the album's release, it already felt a little bit late in the day to start work on a second single, but Isness fans were excited nonetheless. More news dribbled out over the course of the year. By the end of June, a release date was in place but not announced due to previous releases being delayed and causing confusion. A music video directed by the band was also announced. Gaz confirmed the 40-minute single after the Stereoletto performance. By the end of the year, The Otherness was announced containing 4 reinterpretations of the track. Around the same time, it was revealed that these tracks were recorded for the single, but would remain Otherness exclusives, with Divinity now intended to be a 3-track chart-eligible single, perhaps taking advantage of the piece's poppy sound. In March 2004, almost a year after the single's announcement, promo CDs began to circulate, with James Hyman playing the Spectre mix on his XFM show. I was lucky enough to receive one of these promos at the time and enthused about it online in anticipation of the full release. And then nothing. The Artful website began to sell the promo singles in April, and a few weeks later Gaz announced the forthcoming second Amorphous album on BBC Six Music. The single quietly slipped away into obscurity. The promo CDs being very limited, they now go for quite a lot of money, selling upwards of £30 on Discogs. One was listed on the site for $149 Australian, although it never sold. Were a 3-track single ever to have been released, it would no doubt have included the 3 tracks on the promo, edits of the album version and live the band mix, as well as the radio-friendly Spectre mix. It's possible that the package would have been identical. The artwork continues the use of the new font, and the cover image, an angelic fairy-like character in a circle, would be reused the following year for Alice in Ultraland, which gives the release a strangely transitional feel. Released as FSOL CD 108, it leaves another gap, 107, in the FSOL recordings catalogue. After this, the band would part company with Artful Fulfill, having not felt it a particularly fruitful partnership. In terms of the lost multi-part single, obviously there's no real confirmation of what it could have been, and it was never completely finished, but one might possibly guess at something like this. Divinity is SixMix, The Emptiness of Nothingness, then titled The Otherness, Maharishi Raga, The Band, Mr. Sponge's Groovy Oscillations, The Conga Run, Divinity Album Edit, Toy Piano. At 34 minutes it could easily have played out like that, or maybe there are numerous other versions we've never heard. Divinity SixMix. Divinity always had potential to be a proper pop song, and with the SixMix this potential was realised, echoing the original's extended instrumental intro and kicking off straight into the song section with drums all the way through and a new, much improved vocal by Gaz. It's an immediate, uplifting acoustic pop song in and out in 4 minutes with a catchy chorus. In a different world it might even have been a hit. As it was, despite some play on James Hyman's XFM show, it has languished in obscurity and one of the rarest Dougans Cobain releases. Gaz has gone on to state disappointment in how commercial the mix sounds, preferring the in-the-moment nature of the original. It does remain my go-to version of the track, however. Since the single appeared on Bandcamp, at least a few more people have been given the opportunity to hear it. Divinity, The Band Mix. An edit of The Band Divinity, this single track cuts 25 seconds from the intro, removes some hey nows between 3:14 and 3:32, chops the best part of a minute off the end, and crucially removes the line, "If you need direction, the world could seem unkind." It's a flawless edit other than the removal of that line, which feels pretty jarring having heard the original so many times. Amorphous Androgynous, BBC Six Music, SixMix, the 2nd of May 2004. The band's first show for BBC Six Music, and the first show I missed since their reappearance in 2001. For one major reason, Gaz was meant to be taking the Amorphous Androgynous psychedelic DJ experience to the Coachella Festival in California, only the festival confirmed the show before the band were 100% decided. By the time they confirmed they weren't available, I'd already bought tickets, and thus spent this particular weekend sweating in a field somewhere near LA. For reasons that remain unknown, this show was never officially released as one of the monstrous psychedelic bubble exploding in your mind mixes in the pod room, and has remained only available as a bootleg. Stylistically, it fits with the other mixes at the time. It begins with an interview section, Gaz talking to presenter Nick Luscombe about the history of the Amorphous project after FSOL, and playing a few of his favourite tracks. He mentions not caring too much about titles or the history of the band, being much more of a lover of sound, which goes some way to explaining the huge number of errors always found in the band's track lists. Interestingly, he refers to the band as a future sound of London again rather than Amorphous Androgynous, which is unusual in context of this show. There's even a look to Gaz's past with the appearance of the Cocteau Twins track. The final track played, Leon Russell's The Ballad of Hollis Brown, is an opportunity for him to mention Brian, I hope he's listening, who is described as being just as important a part of the band. After half an hour, the mix starts in earnest with sounds that will be later heard in The Wicker Doll, followed by plenty of whooshing noises and odd background sounds and speech samples. Yes, it's a proper old-fashioned transmission intro environment.
And if you could hear the whispering of the dream, you would hear no other sound.
Cahill Gibran from the Book of the Prophet.
I want real gut reactions. I want the audience to have gone through an experience. They love me, they hate me, they walk out. It's all great.
The first of many samples from the movie Man on the Moon.
They say you have visions, that your life flashes before your eyes, that all your dreams come true.
From the movie Minority Report. The music offers few surprises with mellow instrumental psychedelia, Indian classical rock fusion and late 70s cosmic hard rock. In the Name of God, Think What You're Doing from the end of The Wicker Man adds a rather harrowing touch to the mood, before Miles Davis's Rated X comes in as the first of a handful of tracks previously played, including the perennial Cosmic Sea by Mystic Moods, a track surviving from the first monstrous psychedelic bubble mix in '97.
The words falling from those lips, and his eyes. His irises were clear cylinders of surprising depth.
From the movie Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Sundial's Free Sitar is the only track in the main mix, other than Amorphous ones, to be released later than 1978, a remarkable feat even for one of these shows. At 46:29 comes something unusual for a Monstrous Bubble show, an Amorphous Androgynous track. The Prophet, the first of 3 in the show to preview the band's then forthcoming album, Alice in Ultraland, took people by surprise at the time, it being a massively expanded version of Yes My Brother. It also signifies that this is the beginning of a post-Isness era, remarkably given the then recent release of the Otherness and Divinity. After a more disjointed first half, the mix moves into a mix of more groove-oriented instrumentals, closer to earlier SMPB mixes, and away from the cut-up hard rock approach of the previous 2, with an increasing emphasis on folk music between the heavier tracks. Billy the Onion is the second track from Alice in Ultraland to appear, and a slightly different mix to the final version, including a different synth line, followed a couple of tracks later by All Is Harvest, still called Air at the time. Between the 2 is a Mahavishnu Orchestra track which features a very brief appearance of a 3D Headspace Tour vocal sample near the end. Over All Is Harvest, a final interview section takes place, with Gaz giving some track titles for what was played, mostly correct, although there's a reference to a band called Jerk Machine who don't exist. Probably trolling. The key part of this tracklist is the official announcement of Alice in Ultraland as the next Amorphous album. This came as a huge surprise and disappointment to fans who were eagerly awaiting the previously announced new FSOL album at this point. A lot longer they would have to wait. With no official release, the show only exists as a bootleg recorded from the BBC web stream, so not perfect quality. Amorphous Androgynous, Afisha Picnic, 15th of May 2004. Following the psychedelic DJ Experience show the previous year, Gaz and friends returned to Russia in 2004 to take part in a free event organised by Greenwave to celebrate 5 years of Afisha magazine. The full lineup consisted of Gaz Cobain, vocals, keyboards and samplers, Tim Weller, drums, Stuart Rowe, bass, Mikey Rowe, Hammond organ, Gary Lucas, guitars, Baluji Srivastav, sitar, Diane Harris, live visuals. Brian was not present at all. Building on previous live experience, this would be the debut performance of Amorphous Androgynous as a full live band. No official setlist has been made known, but reviews suggest it ran something like this. Instrumental warm-up, The Lovers, All Is Harvest, The Prophet, High Tide on the Sea of Flesh, Divinity, Unknown Track, We Have Explosive, The Mellow Hippo Disco Show. The appearance of We Have Explosive might seem strange at first, it generally being considered the catalyst that killed Gaz's interest in the FSOL sound, but it's also intrinsically quite a fun track, and that element is brought to the fore in the live versions, played considerably faster than the studio version and with live drums. The Unknown Track has been described as something from Alice in Ultraland. The divinity that was referenced might well have been the emptiness of nothingness, itself a very vast reworking of Divinity being constructed at the time. Sadly, in circumstances bizarrely matching the last full gig, FSOL at the Essential Festival, the band were forced to start late and thus had the show cut short due to curfew restrictions. This time the Russian militia were involved, a slightly more intimidating shutdown than the power simply being pulled in 1997. As with the Stereoletto show, Russian FSOL list members were present and provided the following reviews. Review by Streamline. The venue? The event took place on the territory which belongs to the biggest stadium in Moscow City, Luzhniki. The stadium stands on the Moscow River, so the festival ground was situated on the bank. The atmosphere was quite warm and the sky was clear. The fest started at 3 PM, but we arrived at 7 to 8 PM because of our long and drunk walk along the Moscow city and because of no interest in those tea drinking ceremonies, etc., and DJs, bands performing prior to FSOL, which were due on at 9 to 10 PM. Can't understand all those organisers, and Gaz and Co who finished their dinner at 9 PM and slowly began to prepare for the gig. Problems with organisation. The crowd was huge and it was really cool to watch the show from the pit in front of the stage, which is the closest place to the video screens and guys, and got a good opportunity to take some pics. The MTV crew were shooting some video footage, not the entire gig, for their report shown later in Newsblock, and Garry was hanging along with the MTV guy in the studio for about an hour discussing something, answering questions and ordering videos. All this shit was broadcasted live, but the stage was too tall to take some Garry in action shots, and the main reason we came there was the music, so I tried to relax, smoke and listen. The backstage area had some free juices and wines along with vodka. The gig. The stage was decorated with flowers brought by Gaz and friends from London and trees brought in from Moscow especially for the show. There were 2 video screens in the back showing the cool video installations during the show made by Gaz's girlfriend Diane Harris. She was taking shots of Gaz during the whole show. The first video shots were shown on a blinking FSOL logo. Very cool. The band started to perform with some kind of jam. It was cool and definitely sounded like early Pink Floyd records. Then The Lovers, Air, The Prophet, High Tide on Sea of Flesh, Divinity and more, heading with some head-banging tunes and fuzzy samples. Also I remember, maybe I was too drunk, then performing a kind of psychedelic version of We Have Explosive track transferring to the Mellow Hippo Disco Show. I may be wrong here. The sound was clear and loud. The number of live instruments included in the show brought some harsh sounding into the tracks. The lighting was just fine. They performed about an hour. St. Petersburg's Stereoletto show lasted about 2 hours. This year the Stereoletto series would include The Orb, David Byrne and others performing live. I was thinking of encore, but the show suddenly came to its end. Can't understand all that shit about the militia. Fucking assholes. Organisers didn't care enough about it before the fest. The backstage. Garry Lucas and Belugi Srivastav went straight down to the backstage area after the show finished. I was first to catch Gaz for a chat. He was friendly as always, second time I met him, and immediately shook my hand and said he remembers our discussion last year. I asked, "How are you?" He smiled and asked me the same question. Asked about Brian. Brian is working in the studio right now and busy with his family, as always. Garry says he misses Brian, so cute. I also made him a compliment on the new tracks included in the SixMix. The rest of the conversation was not on FSOL topics, and he seemed very nice to me and sometimes strange. As always, Garry and others were lucky to sign some shit. I had 4 quality A4 photos of him DJing last summer and 1 small one from my friend. Garry liked them a lot and said, "Good shots, man. I've got all that signed. Love, man, Garry Cobain, etc." Then my friend took a picture of me and him together and we shook hands, wishing him all the luck in the world to each other. Right this time, Garry was surrounded by girls wanting him to sign something. Then I had a short chat with Garry Lucas. He performed in the St. Petersburg a couple of weeks before, and he signed his photo also. He was nice too. I didn't want to disturb Belugi. The conclusion: it was cool to watch the first FSOL live show ever. Not to mention the organisational problem, it was a really great event. The weather was good, Moscow was great, Gaz and guys were cool, so the mood was excellent. I want to thank all the people involved in making the event happen. Looking for the next AA live show to winter-spring 2005 in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Cheers. Review by Alex Canovin. Everything went with live drums, bass and guitar. Belugi and Lucas were mostly adding effects on top. The band was visibly nervous. Garry tried not to look at the crowd. And just when everyone started to have fun and enjoy themselves, the electricity was cut off by the Moscow militia. Gosh, what a disappointment. Apparently there's this stupid rule in Moscow that outdoor gigs have to finish by 11 PM, and the band had hit that limit. Garry just said, "I'm sorry, but we have to stop now because a man in a funny hat insists." It started quite late because neither the DJ that played before them nor the warm-up band, which frankly was just crap, would let their egos go, shortening their sets and finish on time. It took a while for AA to finish sound checking and start playing too. No chance to get autographs or chat with the band either because the security people were turning everyone out. So we collected ourselves, took a deep breath and went electro-clashing for the rest of the night. One comfort is that the organisers promised to bring the band back sometime in the winter and do it the proper way, indoors, tickets this time. Review from EB. I find myself obliged to add a couple of notices to the above reviews. The first track played on the show seems to be the new one included in Alice in Ultraland. The first notes played are audible in SixMix show at the very end when Garry is talking. The electricity was not cut off really, the band slowly stopped playing like the militiamen told them to. The problem was the whole organisation of the event and not with the previous band. It was well known beforehand that the concert would last until 11, yet Garry and others, except for the bold man Rowe, came late. After the security almost pushed everyone out, there was a chance to talk to Garry, sign, make photos etc. while he was gathering flowers and equipment from the stage. No video or audio footage of the show is known to exist. Only 2 photos seem to have survived the trip through the Wayback Machine, one by Diane Harris, the other by Streamline. Amorphous Androgynous Arvika Festival, 15th of July 2004. Following the Moscow show in May, Gaz took the Amorphous live band to Sweden for a performance at the Arvika Festival, advertised as the future sound of London's psychedelic band, Amorphous Androgynous. Some progress there then. While no FSOL list members were at the show, a recording of the set was broadcast on a Swedish radio station later in the year, meaning a good quality bootleg could be made of that. The lineup for this show was slightly reduced, notably in the lack of Garry Lucas. Gaz Cobain, vocals and samplers, Stu Rowe, guitar, Belugi Srivastav, sitar and tabla, Mikey Rowe, bass and Hammond, Tim Weller, drums. Opening the set is Elysian Fields, in which you can hear that a fair amount of the music comes from Gaz's laptop and samplers. Clearly with the amount of electronics and loops in this era of the band, a 100% live performance couldn't really happen. Gaz triggers the track sections and applies various effects to them, while the rest of the band play their own parts, including some improvised soloing from Stu Rowe. Tim Weller's drums match the Abbey Road version of the track, although the final mix's breaks come in near the end, making it an interesting hybrid of the two. This leads straight into the Mellow Hippo disco show. The song's extended beyond any of the studio versions, although more closely matches the Abbey Road version than any other. That said, the arrangement is very different, with elements of the organ solo in the intro section, and everything other than the brass being cut out for one verse. Gaz sings along with the studio vocals, unusually. The middle section veers into the world's intransience before going into a guitar solo, the chorus, and a synth-led outro. It's an energetic version that feels like a real development from the studio track. Third up is The Lovers in its Love is the Lover remix incarnation. Belushi and Stu get some great soloing here, and Gaz triggers numerous lush samples not in the original, adding yet more layers to the already dense, luxurious sounding track. Having completed a run of Isness tracks, the band move into Alice in Ultraland territory for the rest of the show. Up first is All Is Harvest, listed as Air at the time. For me, this will always be the definitive version of the track, with Tim Weller's live drums far more appropriate than the programmed ones on the album version. Mikey Rowe's Hammond is given particular emphasis in this performance. The Prophet is up next, allowing both Rose to go mad on improv. Stu's guitar feels very much like the lead instrument here. It closes with an extended jam that doesn't appear at all on the studio version. The Emptiness of Nothingness begins with an extended piano intro. The track list given by the band's management at the time listed this as Divinity and The Otherness, giving away the track's origins. Belushi's sitar improv on this track is an element very much missing from the studio version. For all the tracks, this feels the most cluttered in comparison with the studio mix, including layers of additional samples from Gaz. The Witchfinder follows and suffers most by the lack of Dave Sanderson on stage. Gaz's voice simply is not powerful enough for the Robert Plant-esque vocals. At the time, the track was announced to fans under its working title Zepp Good Love. Billy the Onion continues with some wonderfully scuzzy live Hammond, adding variety from the studio version. Though still too complex to be formed completely live by this lineup, it's probably the closest to a fully live track in the set. The recording closes with Indian Swing featuring sitar improv from Belushi, processed live by Gaz, adding some textures not found on the studio track. Stu Rowe's guitar is similarly an exclusive feature of this live version. There was talk of the radio station broadcasting more of the show, suggesting this wasn't the entire set. Whether this happened remains unknown. Interestingly, the set list given by the band's management included an unknown 10th track called This Is For Love, which has remained a mystery to this day. It's possible this was a working title for another Alice in Ultraland track, or simply an error. If the show continued after this, it's quite likely the live version of We Have Explosive was among the remaining tracks. And that's your lot for 2004, another year in and out in one video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Do let me know your thoughts on the Otherness and Divinity and the live stuff from this era. There's a comment section down below. I love reading your comments. Also like, subscribe and share buttons. All interaction really helps my channel, so thank you for any support. And I'll be back next week to discuss Alice in Ultraland. I hope you'll join me then.